Thank you, Henry and Betty, for this wonderful invitation. Thank you for establishing this lectureship, this oration. I think that's, I don't get to give many orations, but this is really very fun, and but it really is just spot on for what you've delivered to this profession in a much more global sense, even than this wonderful meeting. So thank you very much for that, and I'm really honored to have the chance to be here. And I also want everyone to know that today is Dr. Pitt's birthday. A little birdie, where are you, Keith? Fed me that little gem, but happy birthday. Many more to come, huh? Let's hope. Huh? All right, so thank you. It's great to be here, and I hope that I tend to get personal at times in these things, and we've had a lot of people who've shared a lot of stories about themselves at this meeting, most notably your presidential speaker. Thank you, Chuck, for that. But I do think it's important for us at times to pause and think about what our lives are in these professions that we live that can be pretty daunting, let's see how I'm going to make this thing go forward here. Maybe it's just one, oh, okay, yeah, all right, there we go. We work hard, you know, we live hard. We live long lives in this discipline as well, thankfully. This is one of these things I like to start with. And you heard this magnificent panel you just had on the multidisciplinary management of colorectal metastases and advanced and liver disease in patients, and how much of that was about molecularly targeted therapy. I mean, we use these tools every single day. I went to medical school back here. See, this is the state of genetics when I was in medical school, so I can say anything I want now. I've been in this business for 40 years. But I do think it's really important to recognize the arc of discovery and learning and transformation and translational science that we all get to be immersed in, especially in a discipline like yours, where you do really hard things, and now things that are not yet answered by a long shot. But I went to medical school, and I was going to be a pediatric geneticist until I discovered I was a surgeon. But this was the state of genetics back then. I'm not even in the blue part of the curve, you know? And that's that, for those, if there's any students out there, that's a chromosome. That's what chromosomes used to look like for us, those little silver stain band structures. And with that, we could sort of begin to discern and sort out where a disease might be linked to, or maybe you had too many of one or the other. But look at where we are now. Every day in our practices, we use some form of genetics or molecules, either predictively, therapeutically, whatever. What a great arc, huh? So the point there is this is exciting. This is an exciting time. And just imagine what the next 40 years are going to look like. I can only imagine. But I also think it's really important to realize that that grand arc of things and that grand body of discovery and science and really joyous kind of things is also very, very personal for us when we are dealing with our patients. You know, when we actually walk to that patient into that room, whether they have an enormous liver metastasis or a little bitsy breast cancer. I mean, for that person, that's a big deal, you know, and they're climbing on that table and they're going to sleep, and we're going to use our hands and our brains and everything we can, surrounded them like a bunch of strangers, in all honesty. They'll know us for a relatively brief period of time. Absolute total trust in what we're going to do for them. It's pretty astonishing. And I do think that we really need to, you know, stay grounded to that presence, that what we get to do is an extraordinary thing. I think it's a great joy. I know it's a great privilege. And I think we have to keep that in our brains in each and every day when we start to have other things that might interfere with that perspective. And we have a great way of getting there too, you know, and we create this culture that we all live in and which sustains us in our lives as surgeons. But we start with our wonderful medical schools. I mean, I call my days in medical school, and I bet many of you do as well, as some of the happiest days of my life. I mean, the amount of stuff that we stuff into those young people's brains and the camaraderie that they develop during that period is truly astonishing. Think back to that. For those of you that are still there, be thankful that you are. You'll never have anybody try to teach you something so hard ever again in your whole life, and you'll learn just a ton of stuff. You don't become a doctor quite, but you actually get the platform there that sort of prepares you for this immersive life that we're eventually going to live as doctors. And we do this by this incredible network, social network of enculturement. You know, we don't tell you to go read a book. We do tell you to go read a book, but really we teach you these things by embracing you and bringing you along with us, and this really deep experiential learning piece that really is how we create our structures where we live, how we transfer really most of the things we know, certainly the way that we build that sense of responsibility and convey, we hope, that joy and that privilege. And certainly we find our directions. We line up in white coats, you know, and take pictures every year, all of us. We bring you into our groups. And sometimes, for some people, it's easier to be brought into that group than for others. Certainly there were times when the others were not necessarily as welcome as they are now. And thankfully, I think we are beginning to realize that this is a great career and a pathway for everyone, and we can do it. We have to work on it, though. We have to work on it. But then when you get done with all that wonderful, dense experiential stuff, surrounded by senior residents and students and physicians, and from most of the surgeons in this country, and people that do your kind of work actually often are bundled together in the centers that have a core element of education and research coupled with it. Not always, but for a lot of surgeons, and for many of us even, once you finish with that wonderful immersive training, pack it in kind of thing, all of a sudden you're out there in the workforce, right? And you kind of lose that. It's very easy to maybe forget about that culture which raised you and which every day kind of sustains you if you start, once you get into the grind of it. Once you get into the grind of it, it can start to feel kind of different. The other thing that has happened, which I think is just fantastic, I mean, talk about the molecular stuff. Look at these transformative advances of surgery that have come along in my lifetime in surgery. Now, we haven't always done a great job of disseminating them, of training and adopting, and each one of these, regrettably, has come with a wave of harm, in all honesty, to our patients, as we have allowed our learning curves to be borne by our patients. We're getting past that. We're starting to build infrastructure that's going to prevent that. But look at these things. None of these things were around when I was a resident, and many others in this room could say the same thing. But no question about it, computer-aided surgery, we call it robotic surgery now, but computer-aided surgery is part of our future for sure. Image guidance, augmented reality, augmented visualization, what we would label as precision surgery. We hear a lot about precision medicine. We all do precision surgery now, and it's a really good thing for our patients. But we have to figure out how we're going to learn to do this safely, not in just the little special centers that do this, but across the board, because these tools are coming for us. And very soon, we're going to have artificial intelligence as part of our repertoire as well, in many, many domains, not just in simple stuff. So we need to own this stuff. This is both a joy and a potential threat at times. But if I really consider what has been the biggest change in my lifetime in surgery, and I think many others would say, it's really been this change of medicine, of being kind of really a series of little cottage industries, you know, little individual physician-led, physician-driven things, into what is now really a massive corporate structure of healthcare delivery. We can talk about percentage of GDP, whatever you want, but medicine, surgery, and surgery in particular, in alignment with these massive corporations, has really changed a little bit of the flavor of how this place in which we deliver our work. It's changed how we get paid. It's changed how we work our compensation models. And for those of us that have been around for a long time, we certainly see a big change in the metrics by which we reward and measure surgeons and how we develop compensation things. The regulatory frameworks are explosive, and I can understand where they come from. They're not bad, but they're very hard to intersect with at times as a person within that infrastructure. And that can be a harmful daily grind to some of us. And all of these things put together kind of do, around the edges, lead us to think that maybe we don't have the same control over our lives that we once had, or that even we should have on a daily basis. That said, surgeons, if we look at the groups of physicians and healthcare in this big corporate structure, the groups that have really consistently put the greatest pressure on themselves relative to performance are our surgeons. And you'll see, I'm sure many of you, and I do have some things about the American College of Surgeons because I have spent a lot of my career there. It's been a wonderful organization for me, and much of my work has been based there. My first research grant came from the American College of Surgeons as a career development award. So I'm very fond of the place. But when you look at it, really and truly, the number of surgeon-led developed programs, whether it's the NSQIP that Shukri started in the VA, or whether it's the Commission on Cancer, or the Committee on Trauma, surgeons have always had a really front-burner approach to trying to optimize their performance as individuals, as systems, and to measure things and do it better. Like we heard yesterday from Dr. Vollmer, be better. I mean, this is something the college and all of us, I mean, the college happens to be a gathering spot for that. This is all surgeon-led stuff. We're not doing this because somebody's making us do it. We're doing this because we want to do this. So it can be a really rewarding piece of what we do, provided we can continue to see our interface with this. And we do think it's our responsibility. I mean, we don't necessarily have that structure in our daily corporate healthcare lives to identify what our space is in this. In fact, we're often given different metrics to run by. But we really do, as surgeons, believe this is our responsibility. It's what we do. We do it every day for that one patient that gets on that table. And we think that we actually can, and as Dr. Pitt has shown with the collaborative he's built in HPB surgery, we want to do these things. But we need to, and we have therefore, many people have contributed, and many societies, to building these kind of resources within the college. But when you look at it, there really are some fundamental changes that have happened here in terms of how we intersect with quality and how we participate in that massive corporate healthcare system where we as surgeons are actually great bargains, number one, it turns out. But secondly, we have really had to transform our concepts of control and authority that have long kind of been the pillar of what the surgeon brings to the table. You know, as this panel just demonstrated, we have to collaborate. We can do better if we do it together with other disciplines, with other specialists. We can no longer say, that's the way I do it. Why? Well, because this is what the evidence would suggest. We really strongly believe in measurement as opposed to just because. And obviously, with this loss of since this loss of control, it's really just greater transparency. And in fact, many would say greater authority, therefore, because we understand what people are doing. And we're not doing this for ourselves. We really are doing this for our public and for our patients. It's a good thing. But it has kind of morphed that concept of control, authority, prediction, all those things that we all would like to have in our lives on a daily basis. So professionalism, this notion that it's an accountable quality as opposed to kind of a privilege, is kind of a game changer. It's kind of a change in platform. But regrettably, oftentimes we don't have the fun at home every day of relishing in those kind of frameworks of quality. You know, my place says, of those little documents we saw, those programs we saw, my place has probably 6 or 7 of those programs that we engage in every day, whether it's NSQIP or the NSABP or the bariatric program or the hepatobiliary, whatever it is. We participate in a lot of those things. They're good. But I gotta say, the front burner item that gets the attention in my hospital, I suspect most of yours, are those systems that are actually linked not necessarily to the things that we think are important and valuable and intersectable with, but actually to things that are important. These are important things, but they're not things that are quite as transparent relative to our ability to intersect with them at all times. And I always tell my quality people, you know, I can read. I don't need all these colors. Don't give me a red and green. I want words, but you know, I still get red and green. We still get these heat maps, and I suppose there is some value in that. There is a lot of value in that, but I gotta say, when you get a steady stream of, you know, at our quality meeting, we'll have 50 heat maps. Whoa, what do you do with that? Well, you try and make sense of it, and you try and participate in that as a system of healthcare delivery. But it's kind of hard to find your spot in that sometimes. And I'm sure that you all track your PSIs like we do, with a fine-tooth comb. And regrettably, when we're dealing with these data sources that unfortunately come from administrated data sources, when you actually start doing deep dives into these, you discover, well, yikes, that patient was never even touched by surgery. How could this be? Well, that's okay. The ones that are attributed to medicine actually were attributed to surgery. It works out in the end, but it makes it hard to intersect sometimes, and makes it hard to find your place in a valuable way for you. And it can really kind of burn you up when you get mad about it. The Vizient system, I bet you there's not a single person in here whose hospital data administratively is not linked to the Vizient system. It has good intentions. It is very powerful. It has okay analytics most of the time, but we need to recognize that our job is to some way figure out how we're going to intersect with this process. But it can get you down. It really can get you down, because when you start looking at it, it's hard to figure out what is your opportunity to bring it back to the stuff we do every day, which is that patient on that table and the space immediately surrounding it. I understand it. But these are the ones that actually our hospitals need to measure, because this is what determines how you get those stars and how you get paid and how you do that important kind of work all together. You throw into that an EMR implementation. We did this about 3 years ago with Epic. And as you know, Epic does keep the patient at the heart of everything they do. I didn't realize that until I looked up this logo the other day, but there it is, you know? So, but obviously, you think about the bazillions. How many billions of dollars have we spent in this system putting in an EHR? EHRs are good. They're better. They're going to get us places we haven't been before. They're just not there yet, and they really can be harmful along the way to get there. Contracts, you know, I have my physicians, we all have contracts. You know, we used to kind of just a goodwill, yeah, I'm going to work here this year. Now we all have very explicit contracts. In fact, they actually come with very explicit thresholds relative to how hard, quote, how hard you're going to work. And you guys are lucky, you get a lot of work RVUs for what you do, right? I'm teasing, but you do. You work hard though too. But there's a wide variability in how we allocate these work RVUs, and the contracts and the young people that are coming out. Most young people coming out, in fact, are joining these big corporate practices, and they're learning a lot about contracts, and we're learning along the way as well. We do have some quality embedded in theirs. You know, we have our publicly reported quality, you know, stars on our websites for each of us, and we have our patient comments, which are vastly positive, but every once in a while there's a little ding there. You say, whoa, that's interesting. And then we also expect you to be a really good citizen. I mean, forget about this other. We also want you to be a good citizen, come to the meetings and help us. And yet we also are sometimes not well enabled to intersect with actually the business practices of our community, of the places where we work. I mean, how many of you have central billing offices? They mean to do well, they mean to get good contracts, but it's very complex to really feel like you are driving that boat at all times. And if you're in private practice, good heavens, I mean, the notion of doing all of this regulatory framework, of doing the contracts, of running the business, of doing all the compliance, if you try doing this as a small practice or a private practice group, that is really hard, almost impossibly hard. And so that's a group that is really feeling a particular pain. And I understand it. I understand it. I don't have a solution in this big corporate healthcare system, but I do understand that pain. And then, of course, in addition to all of that, you're supposed to, if you're in an academic practice, you're supposed to educate, you're supposed to do research, you're supposed to innovate, you're supposed to do all those other things. And oh, by the way, you have a life outside of this work too, to where you're going to be a friend, a partner, a parent, or whatever you need to be. And that actually kind of keeps you whole, in all honesty. But you add all that up, and what do you get? You get some people that every day kind of forget that joy and privilege. And at any given moment, you can actually dip into quite a funk if you want. You know, your personal time is really a challenge. You have these hassles at work. You have these sometimes obtuse quality metrics that you're supposed to intersect with and be engaged with. And it can actually, with some time, for most everybody, you'll end up with one of these or more, or all three, parameters of what we commonly call burnout these days. And I think it's a very real phenomenon. I mean, I know it's a very real phenomenon. And it's not necessarily everybody all at once, all together, all three, but these things hurt. These things hurt a lot, and they really can detract from your ability to be your best. And if you're not your best, you're not going to be the best doctor you can be. You're not going to be the best colleague you can be. You're not going to be the best partner you can be. They can wear on you, and it wears into other aspects of your life. I suspect many of you recall quite a few papers that were done relative to burnout in the surgical community based on our fellows. And we had 30-something thousand fellows who responded to these surveys. Dr. Shanafelt and Julie Froschlag were very involved in doing this work. And at any given time, you know, somewhere between 30 and 50% of our colleagues would report one of the other parameters of feeling just emotionally exhausted. Sometimes, you know, depersonalized. I mean, I'm just a widget in this game. Whew, that's a terrible thing to say, but true at times, it feels. And even you start to wonder whether you really have your accomplishments. You're like, what are you doing here? I mean, this is really not a happy place to be. And of course, Medscape, the ultimate source for medical data these days, will tell you that surgeons, at least half of us have this kind of phenomenon. And heaven forbid, you're somebody that takes care of people that die on a daily basis. If you're an intensivist, you're on that front line of harm and the end of life, often not managed well in our hospitals. You're at really quite substantial high risk. And now, of course, even our residents are doing this. I mean, those people that are smothered with our loving educational efforts, even they are feeling this. And actually, there's even now fairly substantial data showing that medical students who should be, it's hard, but it shouldn't be hard to the point where it wears you down and you get exhausted and you can't think and you devalue yourself. But it happens. It's happening out there. And we know what happens when this happens. We say that we develop poor judgment. We maybe develop abbreviated judgment. We think that it certainly leads to adverse patient events at times when you have a bunch of people that are kind of poorly functional in a variety of things. We have people that often act out, and if you ask anyone, the cohort that is most likely in our complex societies to be called upon the carpet for bad behavior, we know who that is. It's us. It's we surgeons, and that's really unfortunate. Maybe we have this more than others, and we do. We end up having challenges with our coworkers, and we even start to disengage at work sometimes. And then at home, we can actually really develop some real, outside of this work. We can't sleep. We have broken relationships. We do all these bad things. Sometimes we just throw in the towel and retire before we should, which is a real loss because we need every single one of these people that we've made this $1 million investment in training in. And I think one of the things that really is distinct for us relative to our medical colleagues is the way we own our outcomes. When we operate, we have that very personal bond, and we know what happens to that patient. We own it too, in a very substantial way. We don't get do-overs. We can't try a different medication. We can't, let's regroup here and try it. We did it, and when we have complications, we feel it. It actually harms us. I mean, the amount of physician harm, surgeon harm, emotional harm that comes with a bad outcome is really painful, and it comes with measurable amounts of pain, according to many studies, including emotional exhaustion, depersonalization. And interestingly, when we have these complications, in our RMNM, we always try to really look at sort of the systemy things that led to it, and the multiplicity of errors, or things that were not controllable. But in fact, when we actually have adverse events, most of us blame ourselves, plain and simple, and we blame it on poor judgment. And we really don't necessarily want to attribute it to these other things, which actually are almost always in some way a contributing factor. But we own it. And that too is a form of harm for us. I bet you can't read this, but with this, not only do you get these characteristics up here, but here many of us actually progress to real live depression. Okay? This is a clinical ICD-9 kind of disease. This is a treatable condition. But do we get treated? Not necessarily. And in fact, of those of us that had reported errors on these surgeries, fully 55% of those surgeons had measurable, diagnosable depression. Depression. It's treatable. We can take care of it. Don't suffer. And yet we don't have very much in the way of peer-to-peer support. I got to say, in my place, I have a real low threshold for calling people in and talking to them to help them get back on that horse. But that's not true across the country, and I got there in sort of a painful way. But it really is important that we consider that when one of these bad things happen, the only person who can really get us back on that horse again, help us recover from that, is somebody else who understands that domain in which we live. I can go home and talk to my husband about a complication and how bad I feel all I want, and it's just not the same as calling a friend who is a surgeon who understands that and the harm that comes with that, to help you get over that. It's actually a big problem, even more so for women. In the OBGYN literature, there's a well-known phenomena that after the first bad adverse event, the first bad outcome of a pregnancy, many women forgo OB altogether. Just no mechanism to recover from those kind of bad things. Not okay. Not okay. We need to build some of these things. And Dr. Joe Shapiro, who is a brilliant otolaryngologist at the Brigham, has set up a really one of the few well-structured programs to help physicians recover and use peer-to-peer counseling, trained peer-to-peer counselors to help us recover from these bad things when they happen. We need to do more of that. We haven't done it at our institution. We do it personally, but we need all of us to start thinking about how we're going to do this in a more structured kind of way. But there is a gendered element to this. I mean, everybody suffers, but women actually have a harder time with this than men do. And whether that's a function of being a smaller group still, a minority still within this wonderful profession, whether it's a function of other aspects of their lives. We like to think about our professional lives and our private lives, but they are absolutely intertwined. There's no way you're going to separate one from the other. But women actually are at higher risk for this than men. And in fact, if we look at many aspects of burnout or harm, physician harm, not being well, many of these things are linked to being a woman in a discipline that has not quite yet achieved equity in all aspects of this. Lots of times, it's not the professional part that's the hard part. It's the part that's at home that's the hard part. It's the idea that, you know, we do have a different set of things going on at home as a woman in this discipline. And, you know, everybody makes trade-offs. Men and women make trade-offs for their careers, almost in equal measure. But the things that really make a big difference to us relative to those that don't necessarily have the same infrastructure at home that our men colleagues do is the thing that really we think is important. It's not so much how well do we get trained. We know we're going to get trained okay. What really matters to us is what is our social network at home? What's going to let us achieve success by virtue of having a well-formed personal support system network to take care of all of those things that do impact on your life at work. It's not separable. It's not separable. How do we get there? And you can't talk about women in surgery without talking about children. Not everyone has children. Not everybody is going to have children, but children do make a difference to many of us and to many, certainly to those that are coming along and considering our discipline as their future. And what we see, of course, is that women tend to have hired people to take care of their kids. You know, I remember I had this total portfolio of nannies and parents and in-laws, and I mean, it was like a constant restructuring, but it worked, got through. But again, I don't know how people do it without their parents, to tell you the truth, but people do. And in most women, you know, about 26% of them will have the good fortune of having a partner or a spouse at home will do that. Whereas for most men, it's about 80% will have a partner or a spouse at home doing this work. It's great, but it makes a difference. I'm just telling you, and it's not so much to say one is right or wrong, but just to be aware of these differences. And similarly, when do we have our kids? By the time most men are in practice, 70% of them have already had their families, or certainly have started their families, where most women are just beginning at that extraordinarily busy time to start to have families. Throw that on top of starting a practice and stepping out of that wonderful cocoon of safety that we're all accustomed to. And for those, since this is an academic conference, for those that are in academia, you know, this is probably, I think, the iconic slide of the last few years for women in academia. And we all start at the same point, but at the end of our careers, the men generally end up as professors and chairs and deans, if you want to be a dean, heaven forbid, whatever. And the women end up kind of not progressing to that degree. And they still have wonderful careers, but in terms of advancing to leadership and the traditional metrics of what we think, you know, would be a great thing to achieve in a career, there is still this disparity. And what's even more painful is they know it. They know it, you know. So if you ask, like, does my gender limit my chances for promotion? Yeah, they agree. In pink, yeah, they agree, strongly agree. Whereas the men it never crosses their mind that could be an obstacle to their career projection. Right or wrong, we should all be aware that these perceptions are there. This is part of our world of what we want to call it, implicit bias, whatever you want to label that. I want you to be, excuse me, I want you to be aware of these differences. And so when we think about diversity, I tend to focus on women because that actually is our most widely we're still the biggest minority in the group, but there are so many different aspects of diversity that we need to be aware of as we are cultivating these people around us. And we all have different perceptions relative to those things that harm us and that are barriers for us. And while I tend to focus on gender, obviously race, ethnicity, religion, all of these things are elements of diversity that we all personally, we all personally own, and we all need to be aware of. We all need to think about when we're dealing with our colleagues. We should be aware of these things, and we should understand our own reaction to these different forms of diversity, because if we're really going to make this a great business for everybody, we're going to have to practice intentional inclusion. We have to say, we're all in this together. I get it, we're going to work together. It's not enough to have just representatives in the room. They got to feel like they're supposed to be there. It's got to be inclusive. And this is one, just really quickly, I'm going to digress here and say, please take a look at this wonderful document. Dr. Keith Lillamo, who's somewhere here, when he was president of the American Surgical Association, gave an incredible address relative to women in surgery. Again, having daughters in surgery is often a great thing for our profession. And they both have accomplished daughters who are surgeons. But this task force actually was formed by that was the origin of this. Dr. Ron Mayer then put together a collective group of surgeons from around the country to come up with a document that, at least in the academic domain, gives us a pathway, a roadmap for developing equitable, inclusive careers for women in academic surgery. And it spills over into many, many other things outside of academia. Please take a look at it. There's a wonderful executive summary published in the Annals, but there's also a nice, beautiful document with concrete steps. It's on the American Surgical website, and it's a roadmap. And people should read it. It's just as a matter of principle to understand the parameters around diversity, equity, and advancement in academic career. But back to feeling well. We're trying to figure out how do we wrap our arms around these occasional moments, often for many really bad and durable moments. The American College of Surgeons has stepped into this wellness space as well. I don't know how many of you have gone to the website and done your little wellness barometer. I check mine every couple of months or so, and I can tell you I move along that needle in different ways. It lets you sort of do a spot check on how you're feeling relative to your everyday participation as a surgeon. And there's a whole slew of little websites, resources on our website that you can link to, that you can think about, help operationalizing your personal approach as well as leaders in surgical departments, how you might work with your colleagues and your organizations to improve that. I want to say just a word about Dr. Jonason. Thank you for bringing her up, Tim. And I think this is a story that I've thought of many, many times in my career, just because I think there was a moment when Dr. Jonason had burnout. She did. She suffered. And I came to know this one day when I was giving the boards, early before I was ever even on the board, and she was the examiner. And let me tell you, she was also, one of these women that I was always told you had to meet. And everyone, I think, that knew her, especially back in those days, and especially as a young person, was somewhat terrified of Dr. Jonason, in all honesty. And once you got to know her, you knew how wonderful she was. But let me tell you, she was somewhat, you didn't think of her as being warm and fuzzy for the most part. But I was there giving the exams with her in that hotel room that day. I felt more like the examinee than the examinee did, I suspect. And but again, for those of many in this room have been participants as examiners in the American Board of Surgery, and you spend a whole day together, and it's actually part of our network and professional growth environment, because you get to know your colleagues around the country, and you kind of chat a little bit about life. You get to know a little bit about them personally. It's part of building our culture. It's actually a really wonderful thing, and thankfully I have aged out of ever having to do it again, but it was fun for a long time, and it really was. For young people, you kind of get in there with these famous surgeons. You kind of think, oh, I'm going to learn something today. And of course, when you get old, you realize they're doing the same thing to you, but it is fun. But there I was with Dr. Jonason that day, and after a little bit, she actually started to ask me about my career. I thought, okay, I must be doing okay here. And so then I said, after a little bit of that, I said, well, and she had been, as you know, the first woman to have a major academic department at Ohio State University, and by then she was out of that job and had moved to the American College of Surgeons in a different capacity and was really just doing all the iconic things she did. But I said to her, I'd say, well, how was it being chair? And I had no aspirations to be chair at the time, but I said, how was it being chair of an academic department of surgery? You know, like, this must have been just a fabulous thing. And she looked at me and she said, oh, those deep, dark days. That's all she said. I didn't ask any more, but it was really fascinating. And I thought, wow, you know, she had a time there, and she did have a tough time there. I think anybody would tell you she had a very tough time there. But she was resilient, she regrouped, she came back, and did all those wonderful things that she did most of her career, trying to right things that were wrong. That's what Olga did. But I remember that whenever I sort of started getting a funk, I actually am called back to that day that I had with her in that room in her deep, dark days. We all have deep, dark days. We have to figure out how we're going to get out of them. And so our institutions now, of course, who has a wellness program at your institution? We have one. We've started yoga classes. We've started mindfulness classes. And I think that's fine, but it's not enough to make us, it's not going to fix this problem. That's not the root problem, is that we're not smooth and calm enough. The problem is that we kind of get so overwhelmed with the expectations for us at work that we kind of begin to lose that sense of meaning in our work. How do we get there? Interesting, instead of calling it professionalism, our institutions talk about physician engagement. I can't tell you how many national programs are out there right now that are trying to help our CEOs foster physician engagement. Well, let's call it something else, you know? I think it becomes almost a commodity that's a manageable commodity, which again, to me, kind of gets it under my skin relative to who we are as professionals and what we bring to this profession, which is so deeply personal and important. Nobody says, hey, let's cut back on what you're doing, right? We can. We ought to think about this, actually, because maybe that's some of the answer, believe it or not. So what can we do? Institutionally, we do have some things, and we are working on these things at our place, and I suspect you are as well. We just are going to try to create a framework that at least eliminates those manageable hassles that drive us crazy every day in our work, whether it's the OR schedule, whether it's our OR teams, whether it's access for emergency cases, call rosters. How do we set up a fair program that doesn't have a certain cohort that are getting hammered with being on call too much? Being on call, especially as you get older, is really wearying. That one night a year when I have to go back to the hospital and operate, I'm toast for 3 or 4 days. It's really hard to do. And we have certain surgeons who live in that space all the time, and we think we've created these special programs for them that keep them whole, but the fact is that's really hard to do. Our documentation, we're adopting a lot of scribes. At the national level, the college is really pushing hard on some changes in documentation requirements that might make that process more meaningful as opposed to, rote and driven by the ability to get paid. And we've added a lot of advanced practice providers. We've tried to build up more teamwork in our practices. Those are all good things to do, but they don't fix everything. And we really, really kind of need to figure out how we're going to support our professional values. But I think we also have to own this ourselves a little bit too. How many of you have a full clinic and somebody calls you up, well, can't you just see this one other person? Yeah, you plug them in, you see them. It screws up the whole day because they're usually somebody complex and needy, and next thing you know, you've got the whole day out of whack. How do we manage our time off? How many of you have checked labs about somebody's going to have an operation 2 weeks from now while you've been here? You don't really need to do that right now. You really don't. You can be present in ways without necessarily owning every minute of that. Maybe we can build a system where you actually will have somebody else who will help you manage those distractions so that you can separate. How do you manage your separation from your work? And really, how much money do you need? Do you really need to make that much money? Because right now we pretty much pay people based on volume, in all honesty. We have other frameworks, but in the end it really is, how much did you do for us? That's how we pay people across the country in different forms, but basically that's the driver. And I think we need to be aware of our own stressors. When you hit that at the end of the day, or that you start to feel that burn in your stomach or that pulse racing, you gotta be aware of that. And you gotta say, this is not healthy for me. It's not healthy for me, and I guarantee you, Pat's doing the same thing, and you can see it when that happens to people. It's not healthy. It's not good. And we need to be aware of it ourselves, and we have to start thinking about what we're going to do in terms of reappraising our priorities and how we're going to spend our time in terms of keeping ourselves well. We've made some modest investments in our program that I think kind of are using the coin of the realm. I don't like having to pay. I think it's sort of sad to have to pay people to do these things, but it's not paying. It's sort of like playing the game, though, of what we have. You know, if you're a junior faculty member in my department and you have something that you're doing sort of for the first time, or something's a big deal, or something you want to just have an extra set of eyes for, I will award my senior surgeon who goes there to be with you for that case the full work RVUs too. I mean, it's spit in the ocean relative to what that will cost us. But boy, it actually is really a nice thing. My junior people aren't afraid to ask for help because they don't want to ask so-and-so because, you know, then he can't do his case or whatever, and it's a burden for them. It frees them up to ask for help appropriately. For the senior surgeon, they get to kind of say, yeah, this is really fun again. I remember this. This was really why I went to this business. It's using the coin of the realm in a very modest way to kind of help make sure we don't lose that important culture of taking care of each other and advancing our cause. We have an engagement. There's a wonderful program at the college. It's looking to build sustainable surgical workforce in Hawassa, Ethiopia. There's 13 institutions that are participating. We're one of them. So when my surgeons, I've got 2 there right now that love to do this kind of work, they're going to get their weekly worth of work RVU credit applied to their balance sheet while they're there. And why? Well, because it's actually a moral good, and it's a good thing for us to do. It's spit in the ocean, too. Excuse my French, but it is spit in the ocean relative to the actual amount of work RVUs that we generate and expect to pay out for people over the years. But, you know, we have teaching to do, we have peer-to-peer initiatives to do, all these meaningful things that can be really meaningful, or things, it's really the way that we need to kind of help us sustain that sense of purpose and value in supporting each other. Really important, I think. And I think there's a great role for our professional societies in doing this as well. I mean, I think gatherings like this make a difference. You get to network with people, you get to share that same sense of challenge, you get to learn. These are really good things. And you make friends for life. I can look at my friends that I met at the first AAS meeting ever, you know? I grew up with those people forever and ever. And they are dear friends, and they're people I can call anytime I want when there's something that happens that I need help with. We all should use these places as those professional societies, professional networks, not necessarily the people you work with every day, but that broader network. It brings purpose in place. And then, of course, there's the simple things like taking care of yourself, you know? You schedule your doctor visits just like you schedule your OR. Get your checkups, you know? Do your colonoscopies. You people should know about that. Get sleep. Let somebody else manage your money, you know, because we are notoriously poor money managers. Take vacations. You know, I've just done a tally of how many accrued vacation hours in my department. It is shameful, and we're going to fix it. You know, think about these things. Think about what you like to do that's your own little bliss kind of thing where you can restore and resuscitate. But every once in a while, some really bad things happen, and this is where I really want you to step up here and be aware of this. Many of you knew Craig Fisher. He was a member of this organization, a wonderful, wonderful man, an exceptional surgeon, one of my faculty, my first faculty member, actually. Just a brilliant, lovable guy. The only guy he was hard on was himself. And as many of you know, he committed suicide about almost 4 years ago now. It was a total awful blow to anyone who knew him, and certainly to our organization. But he's not the only one, you know? I mean, there are 400 physicians a year in this country who are going to kill themselves, and many more who might try. More men than women will actually manage to accomplish this goal because they're more likely to use guns. But women rates, as a group, women's surgeon rates are the highest professional rate of suicide in this country. And these are people that are in the peak of their career usually. You know, the 40 to 50, 35, 50-year-old range. Craig was 48. And the good news is that really, if we can get them past that hump, if we can be aware, if we can get them past that hump, most people only think about suicide 1 or 2 times. This is treatable. We need to get them into treatment. But the fact is, nobody wants to talk about this. And so we have a whole slew of people that never talk about these things. And the stigma that comes with it is really enormous to have mental illness. Not okay. Mental illness is treatable. We have people that are on cholesterol medications all their lives. You can be on an antidepressant all your life. It's not a big deal. In fact, they get better and better. But we have things like medical licensure rules that once you've been treated, once you've got a diagnosis, once you've forfeited your license for some period of time to get treatment, you can't get another license. You have to tell people about this for the rest of your life. So people don't want to tell people, right? It's really tough. We need to work on this. This is an organizational challenge. And what can you do? All you can do is ask. You can't be a psychiatrist. You can't make them get help, but you can ask, and you can ask again. You can offer non-judgmental listening. You can support them through their episode of asking for help, and believe me, Craig was doing all of those things. It just didn't work. And you can, you offer support. You run it up the chain as best as you can, and you provide empathy, compassion, because that's what we're supposed to do. And we need to really change this culture of silence and stigma. It's just not okay. Here's another one, and I have personal experience with these. This is just not okay. Here on many of you may have known Sherilyn Gordon. She was one of my faculty members too. She was murdered by her husband 2 years ago. And here on the right is Shanda Blackman, and there they are with their little children. Having a baby actually makes you at risk for escalation of intimate partner violence. This is a big problem, and it happens across the demographic of America. It's not about poor people. It's not about a certain ethnicity. It's people, it's women and men who find themselves in bad situations, and again, are afraid to ask for help for a variety. It's a complex issue. But we're trying to move this forward, and we're bringing it to the forefront, because when you scratch the surface, you will find that about 10% of people, women are certainly, will be at that moment willing to say, yeah, they're in an abusive relationship, whether it starts with controlling behavior, control of your environment, an occasional slap here or there. It can escalate, and can escalate at particular times. So we've actually mounted a substantial program. Patricia Turner, who was actually a resident with Sherilyn, was a participant and has been a partner in creating these programs at the college. And we've got a slide deck that we're sending out to all of our, distributing to all of our residents, because this happens to our residents too. It happens to our medical students too. And we've just gotten the data back on from a national survey we did via the college. And fully 10% of women will admit to having been in an intimate partner violence relationship in our fellows of the college, or have offered help to another colleague, reached out to another colleague, 10%. It's a lot of people. It's a whole lot of people. So again, ask again, no judgment here. I mean, this again is one of those stigmatized lesions in our profession that we need to take hold of. I'm going to close with just a couple of pictures, because everybody says, oh, Barbara, how do you do it? How do you stay so upbeat? How do you da-da-da-da-da? And I don't. I have the same moments everybody else has, but I think I do have some strategies, and I know that I am an intrinsically resilient person. I wish everybody had my genes, and I can thank my parents for that, I suppose, but I do think it's important, and I believe in blossoming when you're planted. This is the Texas Surgical Society. I got to Texas, I didn't know anything about Texas. When you're the best discussant, you just stand up and make a comment in a meeting. They send you this Bowie knife to keep in your office for 6 months. It's really cool. You get this big knife. It's fun. It's kind of crazy, but go for it. I'd sooner die than pick up a gun, but I went dove hunting with the guys. I didn't shoot anything, of course, but you gotta kind of join in. You gotta recognize there's value in being part of a group. This is my dear Mr. Bookout. He's the guy who's endowed 3 professorships. This man is a gem. He's 97 years old, still alive, former CEO of Shell. Make friends, enjoy your people. Make something you're proud of. I'm proud of Mighty. It's an amazing place, and it's been a great gift to have the opportunity to build something like that. Include the residents in your home. Include people in your life as best as possible. Treat them like people, not like widgets or just doctors. They're people. A lot of life happens in residency. Set off in a new education, a new direction. I started out as a gastrointestinal surgeon and GI epithelial biologist. Now my partner in crime is a mathematician. We study modeling of surgical disease. We make technologies, which who knows someday might actually be translated into a company. If you're a woman, hang together. Hang together. There's still need to hang together. There's still things we can learn from each other. I hope you read some of these stories. It's really fun. One of the Pitt daughters was instrumental in disseminating this. The New Yorker cover throughout the world actually was wonderful. But we still have a lot to work on. We still have gaps: compensation, leadership, gendered expectations, implicit bias, both for ourselves and among those we work with. If you get a chance to go to Africa, go to Africa. Nothing will make you feel more restored about what you have here than to go someplace that has nothing, or it's just trying to do something with a little tiny bit of nothing. And these are the women surgeons that the COSEXA, the College of Surgeons of East, Central, and Africa, this is the area here, really poor place. has asked us to help support the women because they need surgeons. And if they don't have women becoming surgeons, they're not going to have surgeons at all. If you have to join the Army to get a job, join the Army. It's the best thing I ever did. Never live too far from the water, especially with your kids. Find something you like to do. Go to Paris and take a cooking class with your son whenever you can. Make cheese, keep bees, slow hobbies. Don't ever have a hobby that requires precision. You need something that you can do whenever you want. You have to you get a minute, get a slow hobby that has no deadlines. It's fun. Go to Florence with your other son. Things are always better in Florence. And I really believe in blossoming where you're planting. I also believe in never living without a dog. But I think it's important. I want to close. I have one quick little video I want to show you. I'm going to say this is a college video, and it's kind of hokey in some respects, but it's actually not. It's one that I think really kind of brings some value, kind of helps. These things I've talked about kind of are expressed in a very concise way by this little video. Don't think of it as a college video. Think about it in an HAPV video. Think of it as a whatever video, whatever group of community surgeons you're part of. This college, we talk about, it mentions the clinical congress. This is your clinical congress as well. I hope you come to ours too, but this one's really fabulous. So let me just take you through this a little bit and see if it works. I hope it works. Here we go. For the honor of this invitation, Betty and Henry, thank you so much.